There's been a growing concern over athletes collapsing on the field of play. This past weekend, AmaZulu's George Malinga had to be resuscitated after collapsing on the field, but is thankfully in a stable condition now. eNCA Siphokazi Malinga went to seek medical insight on what could be causing players to collapse on the field.
South African football fans were left in a state of shock when AmaZulu's George Malinga collapsed after their weekend clash against Swallows FC. This incident happens just weeks after Richards Bay FC lost their captain Siphokazi, who collapsed during a training session and never regained consciousness.
The two scenarios are actually quite similar, and what happens is during high-intensity sport, there's a tremendous demand for blood supply by the myocardium of the heart. And if there's any narrowing of the blood vessels, then it is not possible for the myocardium to get its full blood supply. And you can carry on with your activity, and then after the activity is over, the heart muscle is still suffering from a lack of blood supply, or what we call acute ischemia. The second scenario is where during training or during sporting activity, during high-intensity sport, you suddenly collapse. And that is associated with loss of consciousness. That is syncope. And that is a very serious indicator, if you've had that before the event, of a possible cardiac arrest in the future. So syncope during effort or during exercise or during training is one of the most important predictors of a future cardiac arrest or sudden cardiac death.
According to Professor Naidu, there are many factors that could contribute to athletes collapsing. To help prevent such incidents, he encourages regular screening.
I think the most important thing is pre-screening. Single most important predictor is syncope during effort, during exercise. So if you're going to be involved in high-intensity exercise, you need screening before. And only if you pick up an abnormality, then you have to consider whether you're going to continue with high-intensity training or high-intensity sport.
First aid tools like the correct CPR technique are sometimes taken for granted, but they are critical when an athlete has collapsed.
The moment the heart stops beating and the circulation stops, then the brain ceases to get oxygen supply. And resuscitation should begin immediately. And as long as you have begun resuscitation immediately, then perfusion to the brain with blood is maintained. And there's still a chance of recovery. It takes 3 minutes for the brain to die completely from the moment the heart stops beating.
Naidu urges players not to ignore any signs of injury or illness. Siphokazi Malinga, Durban.